Okay, let's try this again. Um, um, okay, I made a video yesterday and I wanted to make some clarifications. The first thing is that the model does not have to be ideal right now, but there are reasons why I felt this model became necessary. And those reasons are that strategic errors of outdated models were resulting in blind spots and problems strategically, even for perpetrators. So, where one may observe in most functions that some sort of feedback loop or repair or maintenance is required, and then adapting also to conditions. It's surprising to me that the civilizational model that even got to at one point hegemony, like a unipolar sort of world to some extent quite recently, started to see even that fall apart because of these things not being considered. So there would be a strategy, well, according to me, but the reasons I think so, I've given online and I can repeat them here. So according to me, it was surprising that that result, we've seen empires in history for 600 years, sometimes 700 years. And with those results, to have seen it fall apart from the 90s to like 2025, I think that can indicate, among other things, that enough of a enough of a sort of feedback, internal strategic feedback loop was not taking place, or some sort of corrupt elements took over more than they should have. How I think it's resulted in an error is because of the following. Over time, what happened was that in the global model, we saw that other models can work. Take the example of Singapore, take the example of today's China. So we say there are things of the past, and I agree. There are things of the past in China, like everywhere. Um, in China, we can factor in certain elements. Now, I don't know much about China, but we can factor in certain elements, such as that there have been confessions by other groups or agencies or whatever that they do plant dissent or they do plant exacerbate differences to create instability. Was that handled perfectly? No. But and that's not a good thing. But I can't isolate just China. I can't isolate just China. But China tried to show a learning curve, and then beyond that, in many ways, China tried to be more peaceful than other places, some other places. It hasn't been involved in certain kinds of measures to get its success. And one can say, yes, but China has production capacity and then the people are very like focused and talented. The West had more advantages in other ways. So I'm giving you just a contrast. The West had one sort of whatever ways of it, a unipolar world at one point, and it also had some like signaled freedoms in its model, as well as ancient industries and guidelines for innovation, business practice, and even a sort of head start in global balance because of, let's say, the Ottoman Empire first, and then the Soviet Union having fallen apart. Now, the West could have, and then alongside that, it had the sort of PR advantage simultaneously, and then educational institutes and an image that could attract, let's say, talent, or it could also point to innovation because of free thinking and creativity that its competitors did not get the chance to achieve. Its competitors have to operate in a model where the Western world was dominant. And so they had to try to survive the pressures of the Western world or any other world. I'm not saying they're the only ones who do it, while not being able to take the risks that the West could from a position of advantage. And there had been certain reforms in its history within its own land, because what it used to do before was it used to bully other people, but it used to like sort of try to secure its land and correct the errors of its past as much as it had to, even if not all the way, you know. Um, and where it wouldn't, it would face problems. So where there were, let's say, like issues of race, it did face problems. Where it tried to work past them, it was good for its pitch, image, whatever. And then the disillusionment of other places due to, let's say, we hadn't realized propaganda at the time or whatever, that could have been extended. Even Israel could have had a very strong position today. And this is an example I wanted to give to show errors. What happened was Israel was getting a corridor for modern Arabs, and these modern Arabs were not bringing up Palestine. Now, as long as Israel was going to ignore the Palestine issue will keep imploding on you if you have a basic, rudimentary understanding of human nature, because it is only so far that an oppressive model can go without people reacting, especially with grave parties potentially becoming proxies elsewhere. And what otherwise could be obvious as proxies becoming balancing parties when you're spreading a model that shows that you haven't thought things through. And this already failed in the 1800s in the Ottoman War, um, when the Greeks, sorry, Greeks, when the Greeks and all, they tried. It failed for a reason. It creates too many grievances, even if it works short term, a decade, 2 decades, it implodes. Whereas, what did they do with Jordan? Jordan is run by Jordanians and it's whatever, and there's like next to no homelessness there. But now that's also in Western control, but because it was handled maturely, like Singapore was handled, the same way Palestine. Now, I'm not saying this is how it should have been. I'm just saying there were alternatives that they could have taken that were smart for their strategy. Had they legitimized Palestine and very covertly done the Jordan thing, not had Israel do dirty things about their history or about false flagging, but then Israel had been false flagging even the West, we go on to explain. Had Israel even delayed sort of the Palestinian implosion, which will keep taking place, it's human nature, it's inevitable, it doesn't matter what games you try to play. You don't allow it on your land. Colonialism fell apart everywhere given enough time. And why? And even before that, there was resistance over and over. But a point did come that things caught up with them in their own neighboring areas, and one place got relatively more success. Now, this is oversimplifying this, but then what happened was eventually one place that wasn't very distracted in colonialism, which was Prussia becoming Germany, started to get strong in Europe. Europe did not have the sort of strategic sense to be focusing on its own issues in less distorted ways because of the distortion it was pushing abroad. And as a result, it became one mess and then Germany did try to delve in it, but not in the same way. That became another sort of distortion within like 30, 30 years, less than 30 years, 20-ish years, but anyway, I'm just saying they could even have kept colonialism longer had they been smart about it. Churchill might have been good at some things, but Churchill was neglectful of some areas. And before Churchill, there was a reason they needed to eventually form a deal with, let's say, Indian people for soldiers regarding something that they were having in their home turf. But and that failed, and then they had to concede. Had they smartened up their interests over time, maybe they wouldn't even have had to give up colonialism, and they could have made it smarter. And that's what I'm trying to explain here. Israel was getting a corridor from modern Arabs, and modern Arabs were not bringing up Palestine. This was giving the Jewish home security. This was giving the West intelligent hegemony compared to Russia, China, Iran, and even like a strong negotiating position with other Arabs and, let's say, India and other places. So the West was getting set up for the next at least some decades peacefully while the Ukraine cause was getting strengthened. Palestine was going to keep imploding. This is common sense. This is human nature. You put like 10 people in some sort of a condition and you see what happens over time. And Now Israel interrupts this corridor which was very strategically sound and would have given Israel a very strong position from where Israel could have done Syria without the distortion of putting Al Qaeda, who killed their ally civilians on their ally soil, as the Syrian government and legitimizing it. You know, in Biden's government, they celebrated in Western media that Bashar al Assad was replaced with Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda killed Muslims and Americans, but it killed Americans on American soil. And these are American civilians. It hasn't even been 30 years, and America still mourns that for obvious reasons. Even Iran held a vigil for it because that's terrorism. And there's like Hamas is arguably resistance because Hamas makes up a bunch of people whose lands and homes were taken and they were displaced and their children, like 10 years ago there's videos of, I think, is it Jon Snow, showing footage of children being killed. That would hurt anybody. I would get upset and start resisting. And then you can say, oh yeah, but proxy. Yes, but what have you done to feed grievances so that other parties can make these parties their proxies? In Al Qaeda's case, because there was no country that had a cause, Al Qaeda wasn't even Afghan. And there was no like grievance that we can trace. We can call it out in our terrorism. But if it's a case of you're taking someone's home, but you don't like it when someone does it to you, but you're setting West Bank Christian villages on fire with Christian money that is Western aid, or even secular money that you call pagan, which, by the way, then the religion, their Jewish religion, does not allow them to take. And if they say, no, the books of Moses don't count, the rest counts, then you're not Jewish. You don't have any covenant. Because Moses is basically what Judaism revolves around, any book that came later. It has to be compatible with primary Judaism, or you're misreading. Let's say, to put it respectfully, you're either misreading that book or there could be some distortion there. For instance, if I believe in the Quran, and I believe in all holy books, okay? But if I believe in the Quran, and then a book comes forward and it says this is the opposite of what the Quran is saying, I'm gonna believe the Quran and I'm gonna assume if someone believes that they're probably not Muslim. And then whatever is promised in the Quran is promised with caveats, and even their Jewish tradition speaks of punishment and like they have to keep God's covenant. And in their own holy book, which one of the books of Moses, is a point that says this is the land for the seeds of Abraham. So if your book, either you're saying, no, no, part of that book is wrong, because it would just say, no, it's for the children of Jacob, in which case, give us your DNA tests. But if it said only that, I would say, okay, fine. But your own book mentions at a point that, and I can show you that quote, that it's for the seeds of Abraham. So it expands that definition to also include the seeds of Abraham. And your covenant came true when God, there were 10 tribes and they were polytheistic after Abraham. So they did not follow Abraham and they ambushed Moses as he was passing through. That's what happened. And that's sort of the context. And they used to like burn their kids in child sacrifices, some of them, and stuff like that. And whatever we've been able to find in history, it says that they were not Abrahamic. And then this book, your own Jewish book, says this is just to get the religious angle out of the way once and for all. Your own Jewish book also states that it's the seeds of Abraham. Now, are you saying that some of your book is true and some isn't? So you're cherry picking, in which case, how do we know you're the promised part is true? Because you're cherry picking too. And if you're not cherry picking, you have to take the framework as it is. And the framework says it is also promised to the seeds of Abraham. So even if you have to look at it religiously, God's promise came true when Palestine's area became Abrahamic. So it became Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. They all follow Abraham. It was not any other religion primarily. And even minority religions, they're inspired by Abraham, or they are the lineages of Abraham. And on top of that, you were legally, peacefully allowed to migrate there, whatever excuse after World War. And I think 1917, 1912, even late 1800s on, these plans started being made. So you could have bought homes and you could have moved there. And there would have been those regular spats which you have. Why do you have dispute resolution in your religion and in all most religions, how to settle disputes? Because problems happen. And I was looking through videos. So there's this channel that interviews Israelis, And a lot of it was like, oh yeah, no, they were very cruel to us. And then there was this one honest family, and I respect that channel for keeping it up. And they said, actually, we used to have like normal protests here every few years because there was this news that was, well, this is not what they said, but this is sort of like the picture that I put together, which was that news was spreading that there was going to be a sleight of hand later, which proved true, which would be that they would try to change the local culture or whatever, or like etc. And once in a while there would be protests. Other than that, people got by averagely. You could have bought homes, and I think some Jewish people did, and that's why I used to be two-state. You could have moved there, and there, your God's promise to you is complete. Palestine became Abrahamic, and you got to move there as Jewish people. And then what happened 1947 on was propaganda to displace Abrahamic people, which now you're already breaking God's covenant in your own holy books by Moses. So yours is the first breach. And then what does God say is gonna happen after that? God is gonna not support you. Wildfires, places are attacking you. You're not over time. Your interests are getting exposed. Do you know Jewish people are not allowed to kidnap people? So if there's any Palestinian that may have been innocent and Abrahamic on top of that, so it's the same God as them. And if you say they're pagans, why do you take Christian funding? Why do you take secular funding? Again, your book doesn't allow it. So either way, you've broken God's covenant somehow or another. So you don't have a religious case here, or you have to accept that your book is incomplete and some verses in it are wrong, such in the books of Moses, which is which is the part where it talks about the seeds of Abraham. In which case, you're saying that it's you can't count on it even for the land part, which let alone was your interpretation, but it didn't apply to Abrahamic people, or that caveat would not have been present. But anyway, okay, that out of the way, well, now we'll talk just strategically and colonially, and like even imperially. Look at the errors that they've made over time to their blind spots. 2001, Al Qaeda, which is a terrorist organization, it's considered a terrorist organization in our countries, it's considered a terrorist organization in America. It killed American civilians on American soil. That's not a precedent you and I can accept as a global citizen because civilians' lives matter. Within 30 years, that Al Qaeda has been normalized in Biden's government and Israel's government, in their medias, respective, and in Western governments for taking over Syria, which means you are devaluing Western lives to say it's okay to false flag events against Western, European, American, or other people so that you can have interests, and then those same terrorist groups are going to become governments, and the same people's taxes are going to legitimize that, and their media will too. That is a strategic error because you're fragmenting your own societies. But it also went on to prove that it's more possible than not because personalities match here. That in Europe, I found out recently that 2000s on there was Islamic issues or terrorism or whatever, just like there was in America, which is mourned every single year. And then Al Qaeda was normalized in taking over Syria. In the same way, what happened in Europe was the same groups that hurt Muslims, that hurt Europeans, that hurt Americans, but they do not hurt Israel. The only party that hurts Israel started when Israel took their homes in 1948 and pushed them out and said, no, your history doesn't exist. No, we deny that this happened. And there's evidence that it happened. And they started protesting it. But all of these other groups, these extremist groups, they do not hurt Israel, but they hurt Americans and Europeans. On top of that, the same Zionist lobby, Zionists, I call them by their own frame Amaleks, because A, they false flag their own children and burn them for false gods like money and corruption to no strategic sense. So yeah, they're the only Amaleks in Abrahamic Palestine and Abrahamic Israel is Zionists. It's not Jews, it's not Muslims, it's not Christians, it's not atheists, and it's not any other religion right now. And then you plant bombs in European consumer supply chain. So European quality control is discredited over what little gain. Because, oh, you got 10 people, but now you've made thousands and hundreds of thousands of people insecure about your products. And even if they have less quality, you will have to turn to other places. And you've also exposed yourself as playing dirty. Dirtier than, things, even the West, the ancient West. Acha, okay, before I get to that, let me explain. So Israel was getting this corridor at a time Ukraine needed support and had Western support and had even our support. And these modern Arabs are not bringing up Palestine, which is giving Israel the greater Israel peacefully, cleverly, and more integrated. It's giving Jewish people a more secure home in that they're being legitimized and integrated. And it's giving the West intelligent hegemony over the Middle East compared to China, compared to Russia, compared to Iran, compared to India. And then India, etc., could ally, but you would have a strong position, and you'd even have Arabs on your side, and you wouldn't have exposed your interests in the way that you have today. And it was strengthening the Ukraine cause. What does Israel do? It goes to the UN on September 22nd, 2023, officially declares Gaza and the West Bank are Israel too on its map, officially, which is an open inequality trigger if you're not going to treat them equally. And then Israel, the US, which is its funder and ally, releases information on, I think, October 13th, 2023, that not only had Egypt, but the US had also told them that they are noticing extreme Hamas activity and Hamas is about to act days before October 7th. But forget getting intel or not getting intel. Israel gets billions in funding every single year for security alone, bragged about having the best cybersecurity on earth. It is nearly all military. It holds its people hostage unless they go and join the military. Israel provokes Hamas and everyone for no reason on a famous inequality trigger. Because if you're claiming Gaza is in Israel and the West Bank is in Israel, you're claiming they're equal Israeli citizens. So these are 50% of Israel's civilians now who have no army to protect them, and you have claimed that you are their government. So you have to give them an equal standard of living, not to Egypt, but to the rest of Israel. And now Egypt isn't responsible for them. No other place on earth is responsible for them. You've claimed they're Israelis. Within 2 weeks of this famous inequality trigger, you chose to do no border or intel control even 2 weeks, despite having all of the funding, all of the sort of like bragging rights about cyber security, etc., etc. Nearly all military Israel. You let Hamas cross borders not once but twice. The second time with hundreds of people, a lot of them were military. You don't intercept Hamas. And now you've claimed Gazans are equal Israelis. So how do you handle it over your did when America had 9/11 as a blunder, did it say because we had an intel issue, we're gonna put 25% of the American population on geography alone in a concentration camp and like give their children the torture of drones every day and displacement to reduce aid to cutting off electricity to like hold these people hostage? If they support Hamas and this is how you treat them, you're proving their point. If they don't support Hamas, you've definitely created more Hamas support than before if you have even a rudimentary understanding of human nature, which is that this is not if you're gonna act so irrational and they're just stuck between like in some sort of catch-22 situation. If they're involved, they're Hamas. If they're not involved, they're collateral. They might as well start resisting you. And Israel's own propaganda stats said at least 10% were anti Hamas even after October 7th. So, in 2 million people, if 10% are anti Hamas and 1% is Hamas, and you've been lying about claiming that Gazans are Israelis but that they don't deserve equal rights, and that this is how we're going to treat 25% of our population, we're going to trap them because now they're not Egypt's responsibility. You've claimed Gaza's Israel, and then over your own inequality trigger and then intel blunder and border blunder, you put 25% of your population in a mass concentration camp. You trap them. You bomb their hospitals, but you don't give them alternate healthcare, which is your responsibility. You don't rescue the children. You don't ensure that their education continues. You let Gaza's GDP fall by about 80%. It's around 80 to 85% just in the first like quarter, which is by December 2023, whereas the rest of Israel's growth slowed by, let's say, I don't remember if it was 2% or 4%, by 2% or by 4%, one or the other. But the contrast is the contrast. You convolute the Ukraine cause in the process because first they were like, stand with Ukraine if another place claims it. You've claimed Gaza is in Israel and you start torturing its people. And then you set West Bank Christian villages on fire. They're also Israelis by your claim. And if they're like pagans, you can't accept the Christian funding because your religion doesn't allow it. And if they're not pagans and you accept they're Abrahamic and they're equal Israelis, they're your neighbors by your own covet to God. But you put 50% of your own population, your own claimed population, 2 weeks before October 7th, officially. You put them in concentration camps. That's worse than Hitler on just geography alone. You act worse than Babylon because at least Babylon took Daniel as a hostage. You didn't even allow that. You just indiscriminately put 50% of your own optionally claimed population in concentration camps in the West Bank and in Gaza. And in Gaza, you started bombing the area, just the general vicinity of where the hostages were taken, you immediately started bombing it. That's logic. Even Russia doesn't do that, you know? Russia tries to like negotiate if there's some hostage thing and it tries not to hurt. And Russia is like evil Russia. What are you doing? Acting worse than Russia, convoluting as a result the Ukraine cause because your own people who were like stand with Ukraine are now like, wait, what are you doing? You've claimed Gaza as Israel. Either you've made a wrongful claim, in which case you've done what Russia did, and now you're torturing these people, in which case all Western people now have to stand with Gaza too, or you mean that Gaza is in Israel, in which case you've been indiscriminately torturing these people, whereas Native Americans today have equal rights or special status, which is higher status. And colonialism expired and it became exposed. And then colonialism was also diverse. In places where there was a major population of whatever, they had to negotiate with the population. So for instance, in India it was different, and even today they have to pay the price of the pain caused to Native Americans, let's say. But they're equal citizens. They can go to any restaurant in America, or like Australia. They can go like, they live equal lives as equal, let's say, Americans. So if you're claiming the colonial model, but you're oppressing these people unlike any other group on earth, the rate of starvation in Gaza is worse than even Sudan in 2024. Sudan was about 60%. Gaza was 100%, near 100%. You weaponized their aid, so the next year it got weaponized in Sudan as like as normalization. You're making international precedents worse even against your own people. Had you taken the corridor, you could have replaced whatever guy in Syria in a smarter way without making it a group that had been torturing your own ally civilians. So you're devaluing the lives of your allies so that there's more false flags against them that you can do, and you can blame it on other groups, and they're fragmented and fall apart, which is stupid on your part because if you're destroying your own allies, who's going to be left to protect you when you couldn't even handle a border? And if you couldn't handle a border, I don't buy for 1 second that you were able to manage ISIS and Al Qaeda. Al Qaeda immediately agrees to cooperate with Israel but had been bombing America. But your borders were so flimsy that Hamas, who had genuine grievances, could cross it, and yet Al Qaeda, ISIS, who have hurt Europeans and killed Europeans, who have hurt Americans and killed Americans, and who have hurt and killed Muslims, they've said nothing to you. And you're not even strategically sound about Israel because had you been, you would have taken the corridor peacefully, you would not have provoked Gaza on an inequality trigger, or you would have done basic border intel control, or you would have handled it well to prove, okay, look, we are the better party here. Instead, or you would have waited for the Ukraine cause to be over so that that doesn't get convoluted. Instead, you fragmented the West from the inside. You convoluted the Ukraine cause. Um, you made Israel unsafe. You made Israel's security unsafe. You didn't do border intel control after an inequality trigger. Because if you're aware that you're not treating these people equally and you think it's okay to then bomb millions of people's hospitals, you're making your own periphery unsafe and you're increasing grievances against Israel and the West. And you already claim that other places are out competing with you and they're out there trying to hurt you, and you're creating legitimate proxies against them, and you're turning 21% of earth, which is Muslims, against your model, whereas otherwise it was a lot of Muslim places that were giving Israel this corridor and weren't even bringing up Palestine. Now strategically you've made your own position unsafe because places like Egypt or Saudi Arabia, which whether or not they care about Israel, they care about their interests, and they know that if you're gonna act irrational and break contracts, they're next unless they somehow protest this or somehow have to fund resistance. So now you're being an idiot, you know? If they didn't before, now they have to. And before they were giving you a corridor, they weren't bringing you a passing. So you're so strategically unsound, you don't have imperial, colonial, or religious sense. You've hurt your own interests within 2 years. You've expired the West. The ancient West is the weakest point it's been in the modern world, and I include world wars because of Israel's mentality, because of Zionist mentality, not Israel mentality. And I think what you were trying to do was you were thinking, oh, let's exploit the West as much as possible. Let's blackmail their leaders. Let's break those fragments that kept it surviving despite its errors, that all places make errors, but the West also did. And it survived a lot despite it, even as it was weakened to the point. 15 years ago, places were saying, no, 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 that's from the past now. The real economy it's moving up in other parts of the world. You exposed the West's covert interests in Africa, etc. You did the worst thing on earth officially for the last, let's say, 75 to 80 years, using the name of the West and using the name of Israel. There is a reason that after two world wars, places got together and decided we have enough learning curves, we have enough industry, we've seen enough pain that we should do this other ways. We can do it secretly, bomb pipelines or whatever, but there are lines that we have to start avoiding now, not because we want to, but because strategic sense necessitates it. And you tried to expire all of that to no strategic sense, and then you try to shut off feedback loops. It's one thing where it's like, oh yeah, it goes against our agenda interest. It's another thing when your own decision making is going against your agendas, and this has happened in history that bad leadership had caused once successful Mongols or Mughals or even European royalty to fall. It's the same people, it's the same descendants. You're allowing that to happen to the West and Israel. Perhaps you thought, oh well, we can do this, and then we're gonna we have so much information on the West. We're going to sell them out in the end to strike a deal with, let's say, Russia or China or some other place. And us Zionist families are going to sink Israel and we're going to sink the West and we're going to have made money out of it. We're going to strike a deal, sell them out, and then we're going to go live somewhere else. But that's stupid because you've just made the world worse in the process and we're all stakeholders. Because when the status quo collapses, a replacement does not have to necessarily mean better or worse, but you have to start again. We were so close to an average good model where the West and even Israel would have privileged most from the status quo. Till idiots like the Zionists, sorry about the language, but like till Zionists start in short-sighted, non-imperial, non-strategic, non-colonial ways and non-religious ways breaking interests. So anyway, that was my case study. That was my case study. Oh God. Whatever. That was my case study to show how civilization needs feedback loops to some extent. Now, I know you can say feedback loops can lead to propaganda, etc., etc., but that's why universal sentience reform covers that. It looks the other way for certain kinds of gray areas, even down to pipeline bombings and stuff like that, and some level of dirty game, some level of corruption because we don't know how states have to operate or are forced to operate. We can't assume naivety. But it says let's trim the excesses and draw lines where it comes to needless transgressions against civilians to the point your own interests start to get exposed or hurt, such as in the example of Zionist idiocy. Um, now, one may say, "Oh, but this issue, but that issue." I get that. It can be surprising at first because this is sort of a thing which I think has become necessary now, but maybe unfamiliar to those that are used to older ways. Where we've come so far figuring out, let's say, even weapons lobbies or diversity and keeping global diversity, or how to legitimize places that wish to keep their interests, such as the West and Russia. And I'm adding China just because I feel like that balance, they all keep each other in check because they're like they don't trust each other, all three of them. And yet they've shown some level of professionalism. The West has not very much, to be honest, no offense. They like even then, okay, they're kind of like irritating. They're like, we want to be in on it. So like, okay, fine. They're really, really irritating. So we like let them be in on it. But The modern West, while it was doing covert things, barring the Zionist lobby and Israel, I know it was planting things and etc., but it started to show coherence too. The only problem was this Zionist mentality and lobby would get in its way, and then it would get more absurd than it needed to be. Otherwise, the modern West had strengths too, but so did, let's say, China. So do all places. So I think those are three. Like China has shown relatively peaceful sorts of ways of trying to succeed in the modern world in today's China more than other places, and it's shown some model of success, and it's shown good business practice to some extent too. Whereas other places try to play other games. China's shown that, and then China or any place by itself, I'm sorry, I like you. China has never hurt us, but I don't want anyone to get hegemony. So I'm happy with the status quo, which is that the three Russia, in my experience, has not been indecent in its statements about, let's say, Muslims or Christians or Jews or other models. Russia also shows some level of constraint, and the West, I think where it has some like things that it offers is that it shows some level of innovation and some level of freedom, which it is the Zionist lobby got in that the way of that, and it tried to take that away from the West. And in certain kinds of like values that it would portray, whether or not it would follow, I think those can be good precedents, and I think they're practically sound. So I think these three, the West had errors of the past, like all places. I'm not saying so did the others. So did the others. So it's not that the West is unique there. But the West also tried to show that it moved past it, whether for strategy or for other reasons. It was just the Zionist hang up that was corrupting it to a greater extent. Other than that, if they try to play games with other places' governments, if other places are doing that too, that sort of stuff you have to like. We don't know how difficult and complex it is to manage the global model. They're going to try things. It's hard to contain that, and that's why universal sentence reform says trim the excesses. It doesn't say you can't have some shady corruption going on, or you can't have some, because we don't know what's actually going on in deals and stuff. But you have to start considering global citizens as stakeholders in the process, and you have to trim the excesses of cruelty and torture and taking worse ways to fewer results when you could take better ways to better results. Um, these are what it hopes to cover. And then I wish to say, you can't have an organization on average without needing some sort of feedback loop or renovation and upgrade. You can't even have some sort of product necessarily, which would not require some sort of maintenance. So, how do we imagine that a global model that we've got to, after so much trial and error, that is a very successful one, that can even keep the status quo, would not require some level of maintenance that's game free? So, let the games continue, but that there be one like limited domain that's game free, and it's limited even in what it approaches. So, for instance, okay, you might try to overthrow a government, you might try to like bomb pipelines, etc. But then there are other lines, right? There's deeper lines which are you're now killing their children, or you're now hurting their interest to play a dirty game and destroying sort of an important precedent. These precedents are important for practical reasons because their absence can result in degradations collectively, and that can result in sort of like these slips and then these big disasters. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. Yes, you can then live in a bunker for like half your life if you've done something like that, but when we have something good, why are we throwing it away over the idiocy of some short-sighted decision makers? And if you worry that, oh, but this angle, but that angle, we've come very far in this model. And I encourage this. I say you don't have to agree with it, but don't negate it. What you can do is you can improve it. And we've come so far that we found a way to incorporate global diversity and yet the status quo where there's these balancing, mediating states that get the privilege of having, like, let's say, a little cut. But they also don't get to be a mafia because of sort of the public element of feedback and monitoring. Because if they start to act like a mafia, the regular model can kick back in. And the regular model can say, we'll do it better, and then we'll keep sentence reform. But if they don't act like a mafia, they are legitimized in having some level of interest present in other countries or in other parts of the world. And in their presence, they're taking care of like human life too. And they can't like create fake groups or fund fake groups to justify their presence because there will be other places that are competing that will then kick in and say, nope, they're not doing sentience reform right, so we get to. And As for like we've already also figured out weapons industries that they're more legitimized peacefully. We've already figured out how we'll have to work with things like human trafficking or something, but how we can make it more humane. So the little gray areas of like how to negotiate their interests, because I know these countries compete with each other, so that they limit themselves to less dirty ways in competing. We can map that out. We can map out to tangible and intangible industries what places have organic strengths and weaknesses and how to negotiate moving forward. And if some place tries to bypass or supersede that, now it wouldn't be unnatural or top down. It would be taking natural like things into consideration. And then balancing states would get to have their cut with legitimacy because then they're the mediators and balancers of universal scientific reform. And then if some place still is going too far and another place wants to be dirty, there's a level of dirtiness that is looked past. So it's like, okay, you bombed the pipeline, it sucks. There you negotiate that between each other. You know, a place can protest it and you can negotiate it, you can negotiate towards better values. But universal sentence reform kicks in when you go towards deeper levels of etc. And it will also help map out, and it's not in a way that's secret or hidden. Because that's the important thing about it. There's no power in universal sentence reform, there's only responsibility and accountability. So it's all open and transparent to the public. You can map out, okay, these are German industries. This is how it's your strength. This is how you can have contracts with these places. And these places, because Germany makes up the block, one of the balancing blocks, one of the mediator blocks, you need to give it a little bit of an edge in this case, but you cannot take away the industry of, let's say, the agriculture of that place, or sort of the contribution to tech of that place, etc., etc. We can these are the when we have got to a point where we can bring extinct species back to life, we can go to space and back, we can go underwater and discover all kinds of species. There's so much we can do. We can manage global corporations with complexity over generations. And we're seeing that the current model not being met is the current model not being upgraded to the times is leading to existential threats, even in how future tech is developing, but also in us squandering learnings of the past. It just becomes, I think, I sound like Jijik, but like it's because I'm a cold and I wanted to get this out of the way. Uh, but we need to, if we don't do this, we're hurting the interests even of those that are perpetrating a worse status quo. And if we do this, we can preserve some learnings of the past that are very important to preserve so that we can move towards better. And we can actualize as a species that's, this is not idealistic. Assuming the current model can keep working is idealistic because it's the same cycle and it's resulting in a detriment, in a reduction, basically. I don't know how to explain this anyway. This was spontaneous. But yeah, that was that was sort of like the universal sentence reform thing. And then there were other things I said in the video, like yesterday, the one that I made. But again, these are my first videos. When I speak, I have a way of speaking. I'm gonna try to make that better. But I wish to put this out there too. And I think if I keep doing this, it'll get easier. Okay.